All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move forward here. Uh, okay, gentlemen. Now, next, page 12, panentheism. Not a real popular view, but sort of back in the 70s, 80s, it came to pass. Panentheism it's a view of finite godism. It has transcendence, but it's really God is to the universe what a soul is to a body. They're really coextensive in being and nature. And again, there's lots of different ways this is expressed. Back in the 70s, 80s, you heard it as process theology. And there are lots of books written on this, but it's sort of, like a lot of fads, they come and they go. Someone has a new idea on how to explain all this. And of course, it comes and it goes. And I'll just one caveat on that. Sadly, a lot of our scholastic time is spent, just sort of responding to people who yelp out some new theory. When the fact is that some of these people, they just need to be taken out and just kind of, let's spend more of our time, on positive stuff. I tell you this because Evangelical Theological Society, sadly, the last 20 years, the two main topics everybody's, responding to is you either have the open theist or the postmodernist who are in there because it's only a two-line doctrinal statement. You have to believe in inerrancy and the Trinity. So everything else is up for grabs. And so, Stan Grentz died a couple of years ago. He's sort of the leading postmodernist. Well, he come out with a paper, and then the next year, third of the papers, or half the papers, were addressing the last thing Stan Grentz said, or Clark Pinnock or Sanders as an open theist. They'd blurt something new out, and then a third of the papers are dealing with open theism. And just one of those things where it's like, can't you just instead of wasting our scholastic time dealing with stuff like this, aren't there some positive things we can think about? The thousands of man hours of our intellectuals who are spent on this stuff, and all you have to do is give them the left foot of fellowship and say, go to your heretic community and spout your stuff there, because there's a lot more positive scholarship to deal with. And I hope what you've seen, hopefully in part of the class, is refuting some of this stuff is just go to the foundation and be efficient. It doesn't take a whole lot if you refute the foundation. That's being efficient with our time, but we've got a lot of other problems to crack and deal with instead of collectively spending 2,000 or 3,000 man hours intellectually, refuting open theism. It's done. It's been rejected. Or fight. Everybody get together, write one book, one paper, and move on. Okay. Let's not do this for 10 or 20 years collectively. It just doesn't need to be done that way. I say that because, look, how's the culture doing, Christianity and culture around the world? How's the church doing in holiness? How's the church doing with respect to training pastors and getting our level of pastoral ministry up? How are we doing with building hospitals, everything else? And so we're focusing on some, this, when really there aren't that many open theists out there. It's growing a little bit, but we have to be sort of proportional in our response. So anyway, that's panentheism, and we'll deal with this later on, but same problems with panentheism are the same problems with polytheism generally, is how do you deal with finite gods and explain reality based on finite gods? And for example, the idea that God is the world, what a soul is to a body, that's just wrong. 1 Kings 8:27 says, the heavens and the highest heavens cannot contain thee, how much less this house that I've built for you. And so, in the dedication of Solomon's temple, it makes a clear statement about God, which is you want to think in substances, okay? Things that exist, types of substances. There's only three kinds of substances that exist, okay? There's unlimited spiritual, rational. There's limited spiritual, rational. And then there's limited physical, okay? There it is. Categorically, there's your three kind of substances that exist in a biblical worldview. So I think about, all right, God, while he's not a being with a local presence or a physical spatial extension, He's designated as being a limitless being. Okay? So one thing that's clear is we know the difference between unlimited and limited. So the question of where is God, okay, is actually answered, well, he's everywhere. He's here right now. But we'll distinguish later when we think about presence. What does it mean that God is omnipresent? Well, he's here in being, but he's not manifesting his repletive or spiritual presence. Okay? Just like your soul, yeah, I can't see your soul, but it's present. So it's defined and manifest in different ways other than physicality, empirically, spatial extension. Right now, you might note there are lots of cell phone signals going through the room. There are radio signals, but they're not manifest. Okay, they're not detectable. Now, if you can hear the radio waves, come see me, and I'll pray for you and deal with that. But so the idea of God being repletively present, I suppose, as we'll see conceptually with divine attributes. In fact, I'll just give you this now. We think about when we conceptualize God, for example, some people do, order of attributes or order of thought, what's first or second order. Some people work backwards, some people work forward. We start with, all right, conceptually, God is not limited. But with respect to his very substance or being, we'd say, okay, with respect to substance, he is an immense being. So, the doctrine of divine immensity, he is a being immensura, without measure. But that's the concept of infinity applied to his very substance. He's a being without measure. Then we get into, now absolutely consider, not in relation to anything, here's a being without measure. And then we conceptualize God in relation to something, okay? Omnipresence, okay? What do I mean? God is everywhere present, but that's a relational concept where we have an immense being that is everywhere present. And then to further distinguish, and most of the new theology books leave this out, is the concept of repletive presence, which is the last distinction to make, because the word replete means to fill something, but technically is not contained by it. So when you conceptualize God, we don't think in panentheistic terms, where God and the universe are coextensive. The universe is, no matter how big it is a limited thing, okay? And God is an unlimited thing. So how do you conceptualize God? Well, more like this. If this circle in the middle indicates all the created stuff, period, then, God in his infinite being, here the Trinity, is, somehow we exist within the being of God as separate substances from God, and God is everywhere present. So you ever hear of outer space? Just say yes, work with me on this. Okay, humor me, I'm sick. Okay, good. So, all right, we actually exist in ontic space, okay? Ontology, we actually exist in some kind of being space. Now, again, here I'm going to delve into this a little further because there are these big paradigms and concepts in theology, everything from life, death, when you name it, have to do with substances being present and relating or not relating to one another, okay, conceptually, whether it's life, death, anything else. So your soul your soul and your body can be in the same place and the same time, but not in the same way. Okay, God, our body, our souls, demons can be in the same place at the same time, but not in the same way. They're different substances. Okay, so this is why, we think about the heavens and the highest heavens cannot contain thee. How much less this house have we built for you? Okay, in the prayer of Solomon's temple. So now you get into, well, what's heaven? Okay, well, that's a place we're going to die and go play a harp, right? No, that's not heaven. Or the concept of heaven, both in Hebrew and Greek, you might want to note that it's plural. God created the heavens, plural, and the earth. So the shemayim in Hebrew, and the Greek, the uranoi, the heavens, both basically mean an expanse or a realm. Okay? So, and if you read Corinthians, Paul says, I know a man who went to the third heaven. Okay? So here's where you get into, again, the Jewish roots, backgrounds, and so forth of the Old Testament, New Testament. But the idea of an expanse or a realm, essentially, here's what we've got. In the first expanse in the Jewish mind, that was the realm of our atmosphere. There's the first heaven. Okay, it's an expanse or a realm. The second expanse was the rest of the universe, the realm of the stars. And then what was the third heaven? That was the place beyond these two expanses where technically God manifests his presence. Okay? Now, so to go to the third heaven is to see God directly, to bypass these layers of hiddenness or occlusion, and to see God directly and relate to God. So hence, now we see in a mirror dimly, then we'll see face to face. And again, and even conceptually, again, we've got to get, I tell you, there's, I don't want to name names here, but I'll tell you, there's some people that get in the pastorate today, they just make, I'm going to get lumps in my forehead doing this, man. It's just, I kid you not, I heard one pastor, a fairly large church, talking about the incarnation. And he was saying how, can you imagine Jesus having to fly through the entire universe to get to earth to impregnate a virgin called Mary? Whoa. Yeah, Mormonism 101, right? Is this where Kolob is, right here? Did he ride the Kokow beam, from Kolob to get to, but anyway, but here's a guy who was a pastor of a major church. He completely didn't understand omnipresence, incarnation, and these things. But he's literally teaching, here's Buzz Jesus flying through the flying through the universe. But see, what does this teach you about God? God is not here; He's out there somewhere. That's deism. God is, out there at a distance. He's not really here, and the fact is that he is everywhere and personally present everywhere. He just doesn't manifest that personal presence everywhere. And that's why to answer the question, is hell somewhere in here? Yeah, so God's in hell. He's just not manifesting a relational presence. It's just not a problem. God somehow indwells unbelievers. He indwells demons. He just doesn't manifest a relational presence there. So, because otherwise, if you say he's not there, then what are you saying? That God is like Swiss cheese? There's little ontological holes, every place that there's evil. So that's where, again, even to conceptualize this stuff. So here's a couple of things. Remember the stoning of Stephen in the book of Acts? Yeah, you notice he didn't have to get on his spaceship, to see God and go past the universe. Let's get past, the Pleiades or wherever it's at and get to the edge. Now, see, as he was dying, his physical perception was waning. What is he saying? I see Jesus standing at the right hand of God. So your perception is the issue. See, occlusion, hiddenness is the issue. It's that God is here. So, and again, we'll talk more about that, but even as a Christian, why does God hide himself? Well, there's lots of discussion on that, but if you don't feel intimate with God, you're not hearing the voice of God, you're not, then why? Because sin does what? It breaks that relational presence of God. It breaks shalom, it breaks koinonia. So, you want manifestation of love, of God's love, presence, and so forth, you got to repent. And you got to want holiness. So that's how God will manifest his relational presence. So while we're on the topic, what's spiritual death? Spiritual death, where Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden, and then what happened? They sinned. So God did what? They didn't want the same things as God anymore, so there's the end of the intimate relation. So then our hearts are bad. So what happens now? So you could say that for two people to communicate, or think of this in radio waves, what does it take for you to hear the radio station? Your tuner has to be set at the right frequency to hear the broadcast, right? And so God broadcasts on one frequency, holiness. Right? That's it. He says, "Be holy, for I am holy." He's immutably holy. And the problem is when we sin as a human race and we're in that state, in effect, our hearts were turned to, instead of being at 77.7 where God broadcasts, our hearts were turned to 66.6 FM, and we weren't getting the broadcast anymore. So what happens is, because of the merit of Christ, when that's applied to us, God fixes our very nature, or we have new hearts. So he cranks our heart back to 77.7, and the result is the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Now God manifests that relational presence again. So that's what's going on. So now you walk with God again. You walk, he convicts, he leads, he guides, he does these things. So that's why when you start conceptualizing this stuff, like I said, even we don't want to make people think that God is way out there somewhere and not accessible. And sadly, like I said, there's even very poorly preached sermons where Buzz Jesus has to come from the end of the universe somehow, which is, pretty sad. But all that is that, look, finite Godism in panentheism is just completely wrong. Like I said, you can look at all the books written on process theology, but it's wrong on just so many levels as far as God and the universe being coextensive. That's just, again, but those are some of the basics. Other problems with a limited God. Limited God somehow can't overcome evil back when there was just a little bit of evil. How's he going to overcome it now as a limited being? There's a problem. A God who can learn something. If God's a limited being, he's got limited knowledge. Hence, he can learn something. Here's what you don't want God to learn. You're just about to die. You're a Christian all your life. And then God finally learned that there was a better plan of salvation than grace through faith and vicarious atonement. Now, bad idea. Now, the reality is that there is no Mormon God, per se. Whether or not Joseph Smith really did have spirits appear to him, which is quite possible since he was into divination and seer stones and all sorts of things, or whether he was making it up. The evidence sort of goes back and forth because he changes stories so many times. There's evidence he was just making it up. And at the same time, he really did practice, divination, things like that. Problem is that technically the Mormon God has learned a few things over the years, being a finite God. For example, 1890, after God said they had to practice polygamy to become a god, all of a sudden God changed his mind. Now that's because the U.S. Army was on the way to the Utah or Deseret territories, but the United States government can influence God's public policy by these things. In 1978, the Mormon God changed his mind again after saying black people can never have the Melchizedek priesthood. God responded to the civil rights movement, and all of a sudden now everybody, has the right, if you're eligible in the Mormon church, regardless of race and color, that now you can have the Melchizedek priesthood. So that's where, God is, you can persuade God to change his mind based on certain things. So, all right. Huh?
Good to know he's so reasonable.
Yeah, that's right. It's good to know God is reasonable, right? So come, let us reason together. All right, so next, polytheism. Is bad. All right, next one. Okay, no. All right. Yeah, polytheism just means many gods. And what does that mean? It means that monotheism, as we'll get there in the afternoon session, means in the genus God, there is only one existing essence, one substance, period. If you have anything more than that, you're not a monotheist anymore. Okay? Where, for example, in the genus Homo sapiens, there's, 6 billion numerically distinct existing human substances in the genus. Okay, so polytheism would be so forth. You have more than one existing divine substance. And by the way, that's why people, the number one doctrine rejected by people is Trinitarianism, because people can't figure out how God is three in one. And whether you're a modalist, an Arian, the idea behind that is that this must make three gods. So they're protecting monotheism. Because they understand, see, they really, in their minds, they're going to, it's three distinct substances. So that's what they're doing in that case. So polytheism, that's what polytheism is. And as a rule, all polytheism is connected with the occult and a magical worldview. Okay? And so classically that's true. It's not universal in the modern world. There are people who practice the occult that are atheists, pantheists, you name it. There's different worldviews, but still the vast majority would be polytheistic in some sense. So the reality behind polytheism, you look at 1 Corinthians 8, 1 Corinthians 10, and so forth. Quoting Deuteronomy 32, Paul says, he says, the things to which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I don't want you to become sharers in demons. So the idolatry of the Roman world, the idols, the gods, Paul just says those are demons. They're not God. They're not gods, they're demons. You have nothing to do with that stuff. And so, again, this is also what's said in Deuteronomy 32. Paul's just quoting Deuteronomy 32 there. I'll say the things to which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. The Canaanites, the Babylonians, you name it, it's the demons behind the symbols, the idols, the demons that inhabit the symbols and the idols. That's what's behind it. And in this case, the magical worldview connected with it, again, it's varies slightly, but ultimately, if God's a limited being and you're a limited being, he's growing and you're growing, could you eventually grow enough to be like God? Yeah. In theory, yeah, but that's in most of the magical world, those that get involved in it. The occult has three basic types of practices associated with it. One would be magic. The second, divination. And the third, spiritism. Oh. I don't encourage you to do this, but you might note that those who really practice real magic spell magic with a K instead of C to distinguish themselves from stage magicians. So, prestidigitation. So what's magic? This is the seeking of power to accomplish your will. Divination, knowledge. And spiritism, just what it sounds like. You're seeking spirits to help accomplish either A or B above or to do something for you. So, the way this works ultimately, and you might want to note in 1 Samuel 15, God says rebellion is of the sin of witchcraft. Okay? Why? Because the one who is seeking the secret power and knowledge, remember the word occult just means secret or hidden. They're seeking the secret power, the secret knowledge, the secret beings to do what? To accomplish their own will or their own purposes. They're not seeking God's will. They're trying to find enough power and knowledge so that it's my kingdom come, my will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In fact, so God says this in 1 Samuel 15. See, if you can just find enough of this, you don't have to repent of anything, but you can change the external world to make it whatever you want to be. Whether it's love magic, defense magic, persecution magic, And again, every culture around the world that's polytheistic has a shaman, has the witch doctor, has magic associated with it. If it's polytheistic. So in these cases, modern incarnations of this, Wicca, um, example, goddess worship. You know, what's the Wiccan Rede, R-E-D-E, which is their basic one rule? As long as you harm none, do what you will. Okay. Other types of neo-paganism say essentially the same thing. But see, as long as you harm none. But yeah, who gets to decide what harm is? The individual witch or magical practitioner. So it end up do what you will. Okay? Which is exactly what? That's not seek the will of God, repent, and do what God wills. It's do what you will. Hence, the day you eat of the fruit, your eyes will be open and you will be like God. Okay? Basic philosophy of the occult. So that's why that occultism and polytheism was the predominant world religion. Again, as opposed, monotheism came first, then it devolved into polytheism. You know, and you have a constant witness of monotheism, through the descendants of Adam and Eve, and Seth and so forth. But what does most of the world become? Polytheists, pagans. God ended up destroying the folks who went after other gods in the flood. So anyway, that's what it ends up is you end up with this kind of stuff here, and you're seeking power. Again, it's called principalities and powers. Basic magic theory is doing what? You got to draw in the power and then redirect it out with your will. And this works really well. What they call ceremonial magic, medieval ceremonial magic with grimoires and all these other conical hats and magic wands and the Dumbledores and the Merlins and things like that. That's basically ceremonial magic. But what do you have to do? You draw on the magical power, and then through your will, you concentrate that power outward through your wand and direct it. Okay, almost all magic theory works that way. Again, but ceremonial magic is the stuff you see in the Disney movies and everything else. Divination, seeking knowledge, past, present, future, all sorts of things. Again, the more flashy kinds of divination are called mirror-mantic, anything that uses a reflective surface. A mantic is a seer, so that's why you'll see types of divination. You'll see mancy connected with it. So, cartomancy, you're doing divination through cards, tarot cards. Astrology is really more properly astromancy, divination by the stars. So you see that word mantic or mancy connected with it. But anything, there's a whole category of it. And again, this is Disney and popular, enchanted stuff. Any reflective surface. So it could be people looking into a reflective pool, right? So you're seeing things at a distance. Crystal balls. This is actually what Joseph Smith used with his seer stone, because he had a highly polished rock that supposedly he could see where buried treasure is located. And if you go to the Mormon museums in Salt Lake City, at least they did back when I went there in '93, they had Joseph Smith and other early Mormon seer stones on display. You could actually take a look at them. Of course, so basically he's using a magic rock, and that's how he really, quote, translated the Book of Mormon. Of course, they don't want the public to know he used a magic rock. They made up the story of the Urim and the Thummim. And the story was that he'd put the rock in the hat, and then he'd put the hat over his face, and then he'd supposedly see the characters appearing on the rock. I have a theory about that. I think he put the rock in the hat, and he put his hat too quickly up to his head. And that could explain the visions that he got. The rock hit him a little bit too hard. But, theoretically, I don't know. So, but that's the, in a nutshell, that's what you're going to see with polytheism. You're going to see the gods, plural, which the Bible identifies. Those are the daimon, those are the demons. And again, I could go on and on, but if you don't even get it, if you interested in this for the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. Saying, "Oh, good, I get to deal with demons and the occult." No, that's the wrong reason to study it. Because people are in bondage, and the more that people practice this stuff, the more you're going to have to be aware of the spiritual warfare and the issues that go along with this kind of ministry. And which means, to complete your training, you got to have a little bit of training in this area. You don't have to become the expert, but have a little bit. Yeah, real quick. We have to move on.
Just regarding the two rocks there is that it's referred to in I know probably.
Yeah, the high priest had the Urim and the Thummim, and that's supposedly how sometimes they get their questions answered by God. The point is, the real story of Joseph Smith is he didn't have a Urim and a Thummim. He had a magic rock, and then they changed the story. So there's the real Mormon history that they acknowledge he had seer stones, but what ends up in the published history is the Urim and the Thummim. So, huh? Which is basically, they think it's some kind of breastplate with a stone in it, and God could give basically a yes or no answer to something, and that's really the basic idea behind it. Real quick, we got to move on.
I just want to say, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I remember Kant's moral argument, and he talked about a limited God could not be a just God because he could not possibly know enough.
Yeah.
If he's not omniscient, how can
Yeah.
he know whether this is a right or wrong judgment?
Yeah, and that he would, in some sense, have tautological certainty about it. Being the ultimate authority, he should have tautological or 100% certainty, and a limited God couldn't have that. So that's exactly right. So, because ultimately, see, our justice we do on earth is going to be tested by God's ultimate knowledge of what justice is. Yeah, we have to conform to that. But a limited being who's growing and gaining his knowledge can't really be, in some sense, tautologically certain about every instance of particular justice. So so I think that's a good argument. So anyway, back to polytheism. When you consider this, same problem. Of all the gods, which one do you worship? Okay, there's a problem. Which god's ethic do you follow, Zeus or Hades? Okay, see, ethics is fragmented because it depends which god you're following. There's no universal moral objectivism or that you can ever really ground or have because you have multiple gods, multiple sources of what's right and wrong. Fragmentation of culture. When the gods are supposedly revealing different things, you end up with this tribalism among mankind who has different gods, not the unification of humanity. Which, by the way, that's what we've got in American culture now. You just can't have more than one god in the culture, especially when the gods conflict. And so, case in point, we think about just the issue of abortion, homosexual marriage. The Christian, the atheist, the pagan, the Muslim. It's all different gods with different standards. Okay? And this is why when you have God's law, okay, of course the atheist has no law. They're ultimately a law unto themselves. If you're going to enact positive law, so what do you put in your laws and constitution? Well, what we know God has already told us to do. But see, now we're going to have to create a culture that accommodates all these conflicting commands. Homosexuality is okay and desirable. Homosexuality is an abomination. Okay? How do you have a public policy with that? Or Islam must be the religion of the culture because all the other ones, if you practice anything else, if you're a Jew or a Christian, you're subject to the laws of dimitude, and servitude in Sharia law. Can we live in the same culture with Sharia law where it's really practiced and believed? No. So that's why different gods mean fighting in the culture and ultimately at some point civil war. At some point, that's why you just can't have that kind of fragmentation. So, unfortunately, where it's tried, you see where it's just well, look at what's going on in the UK now, in Great Britain and France, where they've let all the Muslims into the once, quote, Christian culture, and you see all riots going on all the time. You want Sharia courts going on. So the point is, while that's not polytheism in the technical sense, it is having many gods in the same culture. And again, the same problems with classic polytheism are the same problems that are created by religious pluralism, okay? Because we still have, quote, many acceptable gods in our culture. But see, to have many gods and many religions means nobody actually believes anything in those religions. It's not important. So, and that's not what people hold. So, all right, so that's a little bit about polytheism and contemporary examples. Mormonism. Okay. Mormons are polytheist. Neo-pagans, that's everything from Neo-Druidism, the new Greek, the Greek gods have made a comeback, the Norse gods. And again, all this stuff is coming back in popular form. Think about all the movies that are out now where the Greek and Roman gods are the heroes now, whether it's Percy Jackson, Lightning Thief, or anything. See, now they're the good guys in this. Or Thor, of course that's comic book, so that's okay, right? We have, but think about now, now you go back to these medieval remakes of Merlin and the Druids. Now the Druids are the good guys and the medieval Christians are the bad guys and everything. So, again, the paradigm is changing, the cultural paradigm. The stuff is gaining ground and acceptability. So, let's give you a couple. Did you know there's actually a North American Association of Neo-Druids? Yeah. There's a Witches Anti-Defamation League now. I've heard from them several times over the many years. Making statements. There's a religion called Asatru, which is growing in our prison system. Say why? It used to be the white racists in prisons joined the Church of Jesus Christ Aryan Nation if they wanted religious privileges, so they could be a racist white church. Well, some of them thought that the Church of Jesus Christ Aryan Nation was too formal and restrictive and oppressive. So a lot of them are leaving that and joining Asatru, which the prison version of it, what is that? Well, that's the Norse gods brought back of Thor, Odin. So basically they worship white male power, okay? The hammer of Thor and so forth. So I did an interview on this a couple of years ago. There was a prison murder that took place. And essentially they were having chapel, and they thought one of their members of Asatru was too weak, so they basically did a ritual stabbing of the guy. All of them jumped him and shanked him, about 100 times, and then chapel was over, and then they left. So anyway, so again, even the pagan kinds of white supremacy. Again, and now by the way, there's different ways this stuff manifests. The classic Norse god worship that's still in the Northern Europe, they don't go around shanking people and do that. So don't walk away thinking that all the folks who practice this are violent. But that's bringing back basically Viking religion. Okay, that's what's going on here. So this stuff's making a comeback, which means guess what? You want to do ministry, you got to be prepared for it. And you'll find out. So you know a little bit now, and then when God brings a pagan into your life, you're going to find, now what are the resources I need to get up on this? That's what you have to do. All right, next one, top of page 13, henotheism. Now, henotheism is a type of polytheism. Just a little bit on this. To distinguish this, while henotheism is a type of polytheism, the Greek word hen actually does mean one, but when it's juxtaposed with, say, monos, see, monos means only, alone, in the sense of one, where hen is, again, it can mean one, but when it's compared, juxtaposition here, one next to the other, this would be the cardinal sense of oneness, one and only one in the set, where this would be ordinal, okay, first in a series. And so technically the polytheistic systems of the Greek and the Romans were henotheistic in the sense they had a first among equals, Zeus or Apollo, who was the head god, even though there were more than one god. There was more than one god after that. So that's one sense of henotheism. So it's polytheism that acknowledges there is a more, of all the gods, plural, there's one that is more powerful, or the head of the gods. Or it can mean of all the gods out there, we've just selected one of them to worship, even though we acknowledge the existence of more than one God. So, and that's why, Mormons technically are henotheist. But they're not even really good henotheists because they say there's three gods for this planet who are one in purpose and will. So they don't even really have one among them, or even one. So they're better classified as tritheistic henotheist or henotheistic tritheist or something like that. Again, they're not really clear on their categories. It's good to use Mormons as an example because they're wrong about everything. So I can use them as an example for this. When you think about, again, doing polemical theology and looking at incorrect views and positions. So that's the same problems with henotheism, and it can be the same problems you get with polytheism. If you have a bunch of finite gods, how do you account for ethics, creation? I mean, you name it. It's just problems with that. So the last couple here, dualism. The whole world is made of, basically equal and opposite substance or principle. There's two opposing principles in the universe. Not a lot of dualism around today, except, yin-yang and Taoism, Zoroastrians, Gnosticism, and stuff like this. What are the basic problems with it? Well, there's one reality, not two. There aren't two opposing substances. What do you do with the problem of evil? If you have goodness and darkness or goodness and evil that are opposing substances, how do you ever deal with the problem of evil? Everybody in the world hates evil, but according to this, it's a normative part of the world. It is always going to exist, and it's supposed to exist. Okay? So it's not something to eradicate. It's something you just learn to harmonize with. Okay? So problematic there. And again, deism. Yeah.
Some people say that Christianity gets us back to dualism.
Is what?
That Christianity gets us back to dualism, this goodness versus evil. Everything has two flip sides to it.
Okay. Remember, well, again, when anybody says something like that, usually they mean they have no idea what Christianity is. They're taking something that it's facially, well, it seems like you're bringing back dualism. No, because dualism means that there are, by definition, reality has two fundamental parts or principles or something like that, and they're eternal and they're this. Well, the fact is that evil is not eternal. It began to exist. It's a defect in the creation that gets restored. So you have to redefine dualism to apply it and call Christianity some kind of dualism. Yeah, we didn't say, so Christianity is in no way dualism. It's just we distinguish between what is good and what are defects in the good. So again, but again, what you have to do is just redefine dualism and then call it Christianity. And say, no, because now you're just using stipulative definitions of dualism. You just invented a new idea of what dualism is. And that's a problem when people equivocate on language. What do you really mean by that? The dualism is not monotheism, period, by definition. Forget Christianity. How about Islam, Judaism, Deism, Unitarianism? Dualism is not monotheism. It's a distinct view. So just put it back to them, so try again. Why don't you define monotheism in distinction from dualism? Let's start there. You can always, put it back on them and find out that maybe they conflated categories there, and that's going to end up being their basic problem. So, so I wouldn't even begin to answer that, except you don't seem to know the difference between monotheism and dualism. Why don't you give me a definition of each? You do believe that monotheism is distinct from dualism, right? And then let them, because every monotheistic view says evil exists, not just Christianity. So So that's why, the Augustinian, I think the biblical Augustinian view is that evil is it's a defect in what God made. God made everything and it was good. Well, then the problem is it's not that there's now an opposite substance. In fact, one of the examples of that is, you might note that when you turn on the lights, half the room doesn't become dark, put the substance of darkness on one side of the room, and then it's crowded out by the substance of light. Dark is the absence of light. And so, but again, but if dualism were true, you have this darkness as a substance. Same thing with evil as a substance. No, it's a defective substance. That's what it is. So that's where, again, part of it is just making proper definitions and distinctions on these things to try and understand it. Hold the questions. I want to finish the section here. So, deism is in effect the polar opposite of pantheism, and in many respects, where pantheism is absolute immanence, deism is really transcendence of God without any immanence. Okay, so God created the world, so He's a separate being and thing from the universe of the world, but He never in any way interacts with it. That's a deistic view. So everything in the world is run by secondary causation. Okay, natural law, our choices, but there is no direct action of God ever in the world. Okay, and that's a deistic view, which frankly just goes against the clearest teaching of Scripture that God is constantly present and active in the world. He upholds the universe by the word of His power. There's a direct application of divine power just in maintaining things in being in the universe. So again, so within the doctrine of divine providence, there's going to be three basic levels of it, but God has to be in the world to govern the world and direct it to its proper ends. And so anyway, all right, with that, take a couple of questions on the defective views, if you have any questions about that. Yeah.
So regarding like darkness is the absence of light, like when it talks about God separating light from darkness, it means no dark matter exists now, and so like I'm just not sure about like the example with like.
Well, you have to qualify all that. I mean, it's not going to. What is dark? I mean, the color black, for example, can be it's a substance that exists. But see, that's why you just have to qualify exactly what you mean by to try and illustrate any principle like that. Because what we're talking about are two substances that are supposed to exist, and then they're opposites, they're counterbalancing. So the point is to show that, and see, the issue that brought it was evil. And so, that's the instance there. But the idea of whatever dark matter is, look, you look at the outer space, there's no visible light, even though there's invisible light there. So the point is, what does darkness and light mean in the examples you give? So you just have to flesh out the illustration a little better. So.
I've always assumed, talking about the Arian sort of heresies, that it was a strong monotheistic perspective, but when I was talking to some missionaries who came to talk with me, their defense for Jesus' lesser authority is that there are many gods, but only one to be worshipped.
Well, who's this?
This is the witnesses.
Well,
I'm sort of curious, is that more of a henotheism view that they're putting forward, or is it still something?
Okay. Yeah, the question is, he talked with some Jehovah's Witnesses, and they basically talked about how they're lesser gods. That's not official Jehovah's Witness view. That's a rogue JW you got there, who's...
He was actually what do you call a pioneer? He was.
Yeah. Yeah, the pioneers are the ones who are spending 90 hours a month going door to door, keeping time cards and doing, things like that. So, the thing is that it doesn't matter if he's a pioneer. You get all Jehovah's Witness material since it began. Charles Taze Russell started writing in 1873, and that is not representative of the Jehovah's Witnesses' views, that there are many gods that we can worship, but this is a lesser one. So whatever he's spouting there, it doesn't represent the official view of the Jehovah's Witnesses. But it's like talking to a Mormon today. The official view of the Mormon Church is the first vision. They're all wrong. All their creeds are an abomination. All the professors are all corrupt. And there was a total apostasy. There wasn't one true Christian left on the face of the earth, and that's why we needed Joseph Smith as the apostle of the restoration. Now, the fact that you're going to get individual Mormons, and probably most Mormons, are going to equivocate on that. They're not going to want to affirm it. They're not going to want to sit there and affirm the polytheism and becoming gods. That's fine, but that's not the official dogmatic position of your church. See, and that's why you want to distinguish always between what that individual holds versus what's the official position of the organization.
I'm a bit confused. Just to clarify, henotheism versus a limited or deficient monotheistic view. A henotheist says there are many worshipable gods, but one God is a superior God to worship.
Right.
And the deficient monotheist says only one God can be worshipped. There's only one worshipable God.
Well, no, henotheism says many gods exist, period, and that there is either a supreme one among them or we just choose to worship one of them, but we acknowledge that there are many true gods. Any form of true monotheism, whether it's Trinitarianism, Unitarianism, whatever, deism, says there's only one true God. So, and all classic Arianism, all the history of the Jehovah's Witnesses, that's one thing they've been emphatic about, is there's only one true God. Their problem is by trying to define the deity of Christ out of existence, they make a little God and a big God. So even though they say that they're monotheists and that there's only one true God, they end up with two true gods. So, but they won't affirm that. They'll never say there's two true gods. They'll say Christ is God in a sense or something like that from John 1:1, but they won't use the term true God of them as an official view. Yeah.
I've had Jehovah's Witnesses try and prove that Jesus is not Jehovah.
Uh-huh.
Do you go and try and show them where it says that Jesus is Lord in the Bible? Because I know it's been brought up many times when I talk with it. I know that you talked about explaining the word, but do you show them that Jesus is actually called this word Jehovah or Lord in the Bible?
Well, when I get to that point, usually I don't even have to get to that point anymore, because that's the most sort of taxing way to talk to Jehovah's Witnesses, is go point for point for point through all the verses they're going to try and bring up. And thing is that, there's just better and more efficient ways to deal with a JW, and we're going to deal with that after the lunch break. For example, Jehovah's Witnesses think that, the notion of God being three in one is incoherent and illogical and all that. So you got to start breaking down all their objections and showing that their objections are incoherent and don't really, categorically, they don't rule out the deity of Christ and or the Trinity. For example, they don't like God as three in one. Well, we're going to look at what that means as far as three modes of existing and all of that. But so they don't believe that, but let's take what they do believe. Do they believe Jehovah has more than one attribute? Yes. Yet Jehovah is only one God. So in the end, you could probably conceptualize or enumerate about 30 different attributes of God. So I just ask them, well, you don't like three in one. How many attributes does Jehovah have? And as they're counting, well, what, 30? Sure. Well, how is Jehovah 30 in one? What? Oh, yeah. So, you don't like distinguishing three persons. How do you distinguish 30 attributes, yet one being?
Have you found a tactic to keep control of the conversation?
Oh, yeah.
They constantly are trying to rabbit
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they call that, they have a name for that. It's called they call it kingdom warfare strategy. They call it by a different, they literally try and, see, they're not there to listen to you. That's why there's lots of strategies to try and get them to listen. Like it depends who's at the door and how they do it. I've gotten Jehovah's Witnesses sitting there taking notes at my door, for, same with Mormons too. Because why? To get them in the mood to talk, you just don't talk about the stuff they want to talk about. See, I talk about, hey, how's it going, man? Bam, and then what you doing, going door to door. And then, see, Jehovah's Witnesses are staunch creationists and anti-evolutionists, and you'll find you're in this program especially, you have more background on intelligent design and stuff like that. So I sit there and give them an intelligent design lecture. I talk about, irreducible complexity and anthropic principle. They're writing this stuff down. Man, it's good stuff, man. We didn't get this stuff in the Kingdom Hall, man. So I find, areas to connect with them on certain areas. And see, then I'm one of their friends and advocates. And then I turn to, by the way, I have a couple of questions for you. And then I'll say, yeah, you guys, by the way, I've talked, and don't ever tell them I'm interested in joining your church or something like that, because they can spot a liar a mile away, and Christians who are phony and, say, yeah, they know you're not interested in joining their church, but, and then you lose all credibility with them. But I ask them questions like that. I say, like, I don't know, have you had any Hebrew? Well, and some of them try and say, yeah, what they mean is they've read a few transliterated Hebrew words in their work. I say, really, which Hebrew grammars did you study? I didn't have any Hebrew. Okay, so you just lied to me. Okay, so, start breaking them down a little bit more. But then I ask them the divine name question, and they're like, yeah, okay, I see that. I'm showing them. Then I bring up my Hebrew Bible, say, see right here, and they don't know what they're looking at, but see it further, like, woo, 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 woo. So, it's stripping away their confidence. And then finally, then I ask him after the name Jehovah. Then I'm like, yeah, I know you'd consider me an I'm a Trinitarian, so I know you guys are not. But I got a question for you. I've never had a Jehovah Witness answer this for me. I said, look, you guys understand. You think the idea that Yahweh is one God yet three persons is incoherent. But look, how do you guys explain that Jehovah has 30 attributes in his one God? And they're what? Because they haven't thought for 2 seconds about that question, how to make proper distinctions. And that's the reason why they're bringing this to their anti-Trinitarianism. But see, they do believe that Jehovah has more than one attribute, yet is one God. And then see, now all of a sudden it's like, whoops, maybe there is some sense where God could be 3 in 1. If Jehovah can be 30 in 1, maybe it can be 3 in 1. Okay, so like I said, there are better ways to lay the foundation to talk with people like that. But that's why that's why you pay the big bucks for classes like this, is to learn what those foundations are. So I'll cover more of that as we move on. I think you were next, and then you go ahead.
This one goes back to polytheism when you were talking about fragmentation of culture. You talked about religious pluralism. So as we buy into religious pluralism, are we pitting the First Amendment against Christianity? Like the whole toleration thing, you said, no one really believes. If you believe that you permit everything, then no one really believes in their religion, and then that sets you up for basically overthrow by, for example, Muslims, where they really do believe in one, whereas, we soften our doctrine, and then you see something like Europe, where it's coming in, where people who actually do believe in what they say you're basically easy overthrow, you can easily overthrow those ideas.
Yeah. Now, there's a lot in there, so I'm trying to pick out, I heard First Amendment and a lot of the things here, but, the fact is that, look, like anything, constitutions as the rule of law have to be interpreted the same way as, Scripture as the rule of faith, because it's not authoritative unless the meaning is fixed, and it's fixed when it's given. And the fact is that's how it's a rule. It stands, it's fixed, and we can look to it as a fixed meaning in its original cultural, linguistic, so forth context. And it can provide the authority or the rule to govern behavior, belief, whatever. We call our basic Protestant Orthodox evangelical hermeneutic a grammatical historical hermeneutic. Why? Because we look at the words of the Bible and their meaning in the original cultural theological context. It doesn't matter what anyone said 2,000 years later. It matters what was written then. So that's why we have to study a lot. We have to study original languages. We study the original culture. We want to find out what the meaning is. So same is true for constitutional law, because look, if the meaning isn't fixed in the Constitution, you don't have a rule of law. You have a rule of judges in the end, because they just simply make up new rules as they go. Because now I think the language means X. Well, all I'll tell you is this, without giving a full course on how this works. But see, if law is not predictable and righteous, okay, two things. Nazi law was predictable, right? But it wasn't righteous. So, but let's say you've got a law in place and now it's not consistently enforced. They change it. It's reinterpreted. What happens to a culture where law is not, enforced correctly, or it's not interpreted, consistently? Is that, see, you end up with a culture that is not really prosperous because nobody will invest big bucks and time in starting businesses, coming up with ideas, patents, things like that, unless they know they're going to be protected. And your business, the outcome of your business is relatively predictable under current law. See, if I hire a person, I look at contemporary employment law and I'm making all sorts of calculations on how I'm going to make a profit based on what I have to do with these employees and this and the stock market. But then all of a sudden someone sues me and a judge makes up a new law, and now I'm ruined. Who's gonna be an entrepreneur and go and start up something or invest 18 hours a day, 6-7 days a week in a startup business if you don't have any certainty of the outcome in the end? See, that's why you end up with, as I say, banana republics and everything else, where you have these underground economies and culture, because the actual system itself, it doesn't provide for predictability. Now, what you say on the First Amendment on that is that, long and short of it is, without giving you a whole course in civics, people talk about the First Amendment. We talk about it in the original context, but first, whenever you talk about government, you're really talking about, multiple governments. Because, again, for American government, remember, each state was a sovereign unit of government. They have their own constitutions, and what they did was collectively was create demons. Okay, so all right, so. And actually, I should probably say, here's the state government. At the beginning, here was the federal government they created, okay? And they all said, in effect, look, all the domestic things that we do in life, whether it's run businesses, police work, religion, all of that's decided by an individual state, period, okay? So when they created the federal government, this little thing here, okay, at the beginning, it was to do what? It was to collectively say, look, instead of having 13 ambassadors to France to make sure we get good deals on baguettes, okay, anything external, we have one army. We have one ambassador to France. We have, all these things. So almost anything to do with external affairs, that's what the Constitution did. Or it simply said, it defined it so in this union that one state wouldn't have an advantage over the other. So that's why you get, the Commerce Clause and things like that. They're saying it doesn't define what the law is in the state. It just says that one can't have an advantage over the other. And then it creates what? One currency, one postal system. But it doesn't tell you what the laws are supposed to be. Where the only really place you saw with federal government was external affairs or foreign affairs. Now that said, to get this union in place, and we got a break for lunch, notice there's always, you say Constitution, you're talking about the federal or the state Constitution that's in place. So the federal government has enumerated or limited powers. States have plenary power. It means they can do whatever is not given to the federal government. Everything rests with the state. So that's why it says, now you have the Constitution, but then you had 10 amendments, because why? States were going to ratify it unless there was a guarantee that this new government wouldn't become the new Great Britain and come in and intrude on our rights. So what they list in the Bill of Rights, that they said, we'll sign the Constitution if you amend it and guarantee these rights. And so it was what? What was first, number one of the amendments? Speech and religion. Why? Because we as Christian people want to live like Christians. And so we don't want a federal religion established. That's the Establishment Clause, because you couldn't participate in government in Great Britain unless you're a member of the Anglican Church. We don't want, you can't do that. There's no one sect or denomination that gets an advantage over the other. But see, all that stuff, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. That just restricted the federal government, period. And even then, Mr. Separation of Church and State himself, Thomas Jefferson, he was appropriating, as a president, he was appropriating money to send missionaries to Native Americans, okay? So that's what he was doing. Now the states in their constitution, I'll end with this and we'll go for lunch. Say, give you the 1780, for example, Massachusetts state's constitution, and almost all the states had these provisions in their constitution. Why? Because each individual sovereign state decided how much or how little religion they wanted in public life, not in public life. So Massachusetts said stuff like, the state must appropriate money for the public teaching of the Christian religion because morality is necessary for good government. It went on and on about how they have to support Christianity. So anything in their governments, public schools, you swore on Bibles to be sworn in as a juror. You had the Ten Commandments in the courtroom. They're teaching Bible in public schools. Why? Because let's see, because we're 99.5% self-identified as Christian. We just don't have a problem with, the government doing the will of the families and the churches, and because this is what we want. So the point is everything was reserved to the states. Now, fast forward, and then we're done here. It literally, in 1789, you see the Bill of Rights ultimately ratified. Fast forward literally to 1940 and 1947. Okay, First Amendment hadn't changed, Constitution hadn't changed on religion, but there's our Supreme Court invented a doctrine called selective incorporation of the Bill of Rights, where now they decided that through the 14th Amendment due process clause that they would take away the rights of the states to decide anything that was incorporated now into the 14th Amendment. So now, after almost 200 years of going along where states made these decisions, now those who didn't want religion in the public square decided, you know what, now we, the courts, are going to decide what's an establishment of religion and what's free exercise, permissible in the states. And from the 1940s on, now there's no prayer in the public school, Bible in the public school, chaplains, you name it. Cities displaying crosses, and now one atheist complains, you have to take it down. But see, and this was progressive, and even you might note this, 1920s, we had the Scopes trial, right? Which is what? State of Tennessee forbade the teaching of evolution in the public schools. See? And then you get to the 1980 cases on creationism, where now creationism is forbidden. What changed? Constitution didn't change. What you had is the interpretation of the liberal justices changed. Okay? So, anyway, so to that, on your First Amendment question, that's those are the basics on it. But we got to break for lunch. So go ahead and break, and we'll see you afterwards.